Today, conspiracy theories versus the truth. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to the latest post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian flavour. And today I'm joined again by Edwin Almeida. Hi Edwin, what are you wearing?
G'day Martin. You know, with all these conspiracies that are going around and also Uppercut posting all these things on Twitter about the UFOs have landed and he's either having too much coffee or they have landed. I'm just not taking any chances, So I'm sort of, I do like the guy, and then that's the hate. I just got to make sure that I stay undercover. But the sunglasses. Well, he also posted a Twitter of him doing some basketball jump. I think it was his 99th attempt at getting it through the hoop. But I mean, his white legs, they just sort of blinded my eyesight a little bit, so he doesn't get out in the sun much. So I don't know. I'm just not taking any chances, Martin.
Yeah, well, the tinfoil hat may be quite useful given everything that's going on at the moment. And yes, I won't comment on John's basketball expertise. As you say, we don't know how many shots he took to get the one in the basket, right?
I sort of, a little birdie's told me that it was take 45 or take 47, I think.
Very good.
And that's a true story.
Or a conspiracy theory, depending on how you look at it, right?
Yeah, it was John's Uber driver actually told me that.
Oh, is that right? Well, you believe everything they say. Now, I guess I've got a few questions I want to ask you today, Edwin. But the first one relates to the real estate industry and what's going on there, right? Because we know a few things. We know that the volume of transactions are way, way down. We know that the time on market has gone all over the place. We know that there are some auctions, but the volume of auctions are down as well. So what's it actually doing to the financial position of, the frontline real estate agents?
Look, I think I've been talking to you about this for almost a year now, how it's all going to transpire, particularly when this time last year we were tracking somewhere along the lines of 27,000 properties on Domain, and I say I use Domain as the benchmark to see what how the listings are tracking, the sales listings, that is, how they're tracking, because they give you a better regional, Sydney region basis, whereas the other portal extrapolated out to the Central Coast and almost all the way down to Wollongong. I like the Domain app as well for that particular reason. So we've gone down from basically 27,000 sales listings to at the moment I'm tracking sales listings and that are not under offer. Around the 17,000, so there's been a huge drop. Now, Philip Seuss has also commented on that in his analysis. He's shown and he's proven that from the peak of sales in 2015 to now, there's been an attrition of sales around about 47%, dropping in actual sales numbers, and that's what you and I have been discussing for a while. It's good and fine to see the auction clearance rates go up and the numbers go up, but in perspective, at one stage we were something like 60% apart in terms of sales that were actually occurring on the ground. So when you translate all that, I mean, for our viewers, it's all gibberish. But let me just put it down into let me just granularize it so that there can be a better understanding, so that our viewers can have a better understanding. So 3.5 years ago, we met with Fair Trading New South Wales, and they disclosed that there was potentially 53,000 license holders and certificate holders within New South Wales. Now, not all of them are active, of course. That's 53,000, call it real estate agents. Now, from that, we worked out that there was an average of about 22,000, anywhere between 18,000 to 22,000 that were actually agents that were primarily involved in the sales side of the industry. The rest of property management and admin staff and property officers. So when you look at the most of these, of course, you've got to understand most of these would translate to being residing or working in Sydney, some Wollongong, and also Newcastle, let's say. So I've calculated that there would be, there's got to be at least 12 to 13,000 selling agents in Sydney alone. Now, when you look at the numbers that are actually being sold week in, week out, in terms of across New South Wales, it's around about 1,200 properties per week. So do the math. What it basically comes down to, there are a lot of agents and there are a lot of agencies that are not surviving. They're not supporting. They're not even making the award wage in relation to incomes. So what I've gone out in the last couple of weeks, and I've talked to a number of my colleagues. One of them is a CEO of a national Australian franchise, and I had a coffee with him, and I've put to him my numbers, put to him the things that I've noted on the ground, and he's not as he doesn't see it as what I see, but obviously he's the CEO of a national franchise group, so he's going to play it down a little bit. But he did concur on one thing, and that is that he has seen at least low 20% of the franchisees drop in incomes. So, and that's across Australia, of course, and predominantly in the East Coast. So that in itself is a little bit alarming. Some may say, well, that's not really a lot, but it is when you're comparing it, that when you compare that to the fact that a lot of agents are not necessarily. We get paid when sales settle. So from listing a property to the actual payment of the commission can be anywhere between 12 and 20 weeks. So it's a long time in between drinks, as they say. Now, I've also had the same conversation with one of the franchise owners of a big group in Victoria, and their figures are running closer to 40% drop in incomes in terms of revenues coming into the franchise groups, franchisees, offices. So what's that translating to? It's actually, there's a lot of pressure on businesses. What did concur across the board with my conversations, what was common, the common thread was that a number of office owners, and there's approximately 8,500 registered corporations in New South Wales, which would translate to about 7,500 offices. Not all corporations are running offices, but let's say there's about roughly about 7,500 offices in New South Wales. Again, a lot of them based in Sydney. So there's a large portion that are actually refinancing or having refinancing over the last couple of years, 2-3 years in actual fact, to stay afloat. Because although incomes drop, commissions drop, what doesn't drop is the leases on the vehicles, the leases on the shops, and so forth. The overheads, they don't drop. So that's a huge burden. So what I'm noticing is that I would say that anywhere between a quarter to a third of the sales, this is the sales agents, have already have done a transition from being working under a business in the system that we work under, like a credit debit. So under an employment basis and like an employment contract, they've moved to commission only because offices cannot sustain them. So that's a real burden. That's a real pressure that's happening at the moment. And there's a large portion that have already left the industry. That's not reported as yet, and it's very difficult to get a lot of these statistics and a lot of these numbers from Fair Trade in New South Wales because they don't keep things up to date, and they keep a very close hold on this data. But from what from my discussions and conversations, the industry is in a lot of stress.
Okay. Well, we know from the latest ABS stats that came out this last week that the total volume of settlements is significantly down relative to 2 or 3 years ago. So if you look at it from the other end of the process, right, we know that what's actually happened is that less transactions have gone through. So that is really going to underscore what you're saying in terms of the momentum is definitely weaker. And I guess the other question to ask is what's happening with regard to those commission rates? Because my understanding is that some of the agents now are basically almost cutting their own throats in terms of trying to get a business almost at any cost.
Yeah, and I look at that as well. It's rather interesting because in some of the affluent parts of Sydney, you find that that's where a lot of this throat cutting is happening a lot more, and with all for obvious reasons, because you've got $3, $4, $5, $6 million properties going on the market. So what I have now, and this trend, this cycle happens over and over again. For me, it's really deja vu. We're going back to the trend where obviously the vendors are in control. In terms of the sales process to a great extent, and that could dictate, because you're getting anywhere between 10 and 15 market appraisals on a property that a vendor has put their hand up and say, hey, I want to sell, I'm looking at selling my property. And then next thing you know, you've got 10, 15 agents bidding for the customer, bidding for the sale of that property. And we've gone from an average of 1.7% in the commission rate to, in some cases, some agents I'm already hearing once again, as I did hear pre-2015, and that is that some agents are taking on listings just so they can get a signboard in the area, because they've got to protect their patch, they've got to protect their area, and these are real estate agencies and agents that are area focused. They've got their patch, they've got their territory that they work heavily and they invest heavily in, market heavily in, to obviously earn incomes by selling property. So when the volumes are down, so the commissions drop as well. I'm hearing 0.5% commissions again. I'm hearing no commissions, only what we call vendor paid advertising fees paid up front just to get a signboard in order to get crowds through the door, because there are a lot of people turning up for the open for inspections, and from there obviously creating a database, because a lot of the people that come to the open for inspections are the locals that want to have a sticky beak of the property, and so be it. It's good, but because that in itself is a listing strategy or a listing tool for the agent that's promoting that property for sale, because it's working the area. That's how they create a database, create a database, and so on. But even that's sort of working against a lot of in a lot of places, because properties are being sold relatively quickly now. So when they would have expected to have 3-4 week marketing campaign before an auction or under a private treaty scenario, properties are being sold prior to auction, as well as relatively quickly under a private treaty scenario as well. So they're not getting the numbers that they would have expected to farm the area, to collect more data, collect more information, to see if anybody else wants to sell in the area, so that they can make up for the losses of the commission in that particular property.
Right, so let me just sort of play that back, because I think there were two important points there. The first was that the physical real estate on the ground by way of the signboards, right, is effectively a marker, and it drives interest and activity and brand awareness. Then the other thing is, normally when they're actually having people coming through a property, they'll take the names and addresses of people looking, and that basically creates a list of contacts that they can subsequently follow up with to effectively offer other properties to them. So if in fact there are not that many properties being made for sale, they don't have the chance to put the boards out. And secondly, if the ones that are being sold sell much more quickly, simply because there isn't a huge amount of supply, and in some areas there is a bit of momentum. Clearly, that means they're not able to use the same processes in terms of capturing the names and being able to create a database of contacts subsequently. So effectively, those two things are both negative impacts on their overall business.
Yeah, and it's not only for to offer them properties in the future, but it's also to potentially talk to them about selling their own properties, because it might be the neighbours that are having a sticky beak and that are interested in selling themselves. So it's really working against the agents. There are some agents that haven't sold properties for the last 6 months, and they're just barely, like I said, barely surviving. The commissions may not be coming in, fees may not be coming into the office, but the lease, they still have to pay the rents, they still have to pay the overheads. They're not, those bills aren't, the postman still brings those things on. So it's very, very stressful for a lot of my colleagues. And as you know, I talk to them on a daily, weekly basis, and it's not, it's an interesting market, and given the fact that we are down to such low volumes of sales. The spring season that I've said to you, like openly in our discussions as well, I was a believer that the volumes were going to rise significantly. In spring, obviously we're just getting into spring, and but now what a lot of my colleagues are saying is that their vendors are holding on to by way of not listing the properties, because they still want the market to go up. Now, understandably, you've got a scenario where in some areas that although there's a uniform number of 14% drop or 12% drop across Melbourne and Sydney, in terms of 12 to 14% drops in the values, the overall values of properties, but a lot of people don't understand the fact that in some areas and in some pockets of Sydney and in Melbourne, properties dropped up to 25, 27%. So it's hard for somebody to palate the fact that from 2017 to now, the value of the property has dropped 27%, and albeit CoreLogic is saying that there's been an increase of 1.1% or 1.2% in the last month or so in property values, but that is still a long way to go from the drop of 27%. Now, obviously, they're all averages, they're all means, they're all the hedonic daily index that nobody knows how the hell, even the person that invented it doesn't even know how the hell it works or how it's all put together. But in essence, I don't blame vendors for holding on to an extent. But look, the ones that are putting the properties on the market in a lot of areas, especially the areas that are palatable for the overseas investors or the Asian palette, the Asian investors, they're going very quickly, and they are getting these so-called $200,000, $300,000 above reserves.
Well, of course, the point about that is that we know there are some pockets where that's true and where prices are a little bit more positive, and the index, of course, averages across the whole market, and therefore hides some of the areas where property prices are still down and indeed still falling in places. But a couple of anecdotal points there. The first is that I've had in the last 2 weeks 3 different agents here in my local area phone me up or send me a letter saying, "Would you like an appraisal?" Which suggests to me that there's a bit of air of desperation in terms of people trying to, force the market, as it were. The second point is my surveys. 8 to 6 weeks ago, there was definitely in the surveys an intent to put the property on the market, but in the more recent data, that intent has gone away again. And I'm thinking that there's 2 things going on. The first is probably household confidence is continuing to erode, so therefore people are feeling less bullish about property generally. And the other is that the truth is that the values that people are being quoted in terms of what they might be expected to receive is still way under what they thought. So there's the reality gap, which you're highlighting, right, between essentially where property values really are now compared with where people would like them to be. And so many people have said, well, I'm not seeing that potential to get the price I want, so therefore I'm just going to sit on my hands and I'll sit this one out. So my theory is beginning to change, and that is that we may not see a significant rise in listings through the spring into the summer. And if that's the case, then that does change the game quite significantly in terms of where property prices might move to.
Well, if that's the case, yeah. Look, and it also the dynamics where I'm looking at and concentrating on have been concentrating on in my commentary and talking to various colleagues is the fact that what we may get, Martin, is a truckload of properties that are owned by real estate agents themselves going on the market, because whilst they're not making money, whilst they're not that they haven't got other sources of income, and it's just one source of income, and that's by way of earning a commission through the sale of a property. Well, guess what? That's not happening. So you've got theoretically, you've got close to 50,000 families that are either earning half an income or no income at all, and that's been stretched out for months. As I said to a colleague yesterday, I said, although the banks may not necessarily be keen to move on to the principal place of residence with a lot of sectors in the construction sector, also all the tradies and everyone that are under a lot of stress in the retail sector, they may not be necessarily keen on moving in on the principal place of residence for obvious reasons, because the banks themselves don't want this market to poop itself. But it's not stopping them from moving into the sharks circling the wagons in terms of the credit card debt, in terms of the car finance debt, machinery and equipment finance, and the like. So by default, it's not necessarily the banks going after the principal place of residence, but it's after this other ancillary debt that is being pulled down from the equity of the principal place of residence that's got them in a world of poo. And that's where a lot of my colleagues are feeling it, and like I said, the bills just keep on adding up. They can keep on talking to the banks, they can keep on trying refinancing, but it comes to a point where there's only so much that they can do. They've some have extended the repayments of there's been a lot of refinancing going on. And a lot of it, I dare say, has been from small business operators that have been refinancing a lot of the principal places of residence in order to keep their operations running.
Yeah, well, we're certainly seeing that in the SME surveys. And as one last issue I'd like to touch on just before we close this off, Edwin, and that is that I received, and a number of other people who watch the DFA channel received a communication from On the House, right? And it was actually a communication from another entity that was using that channel to advertise a series of training courses relating to distressed properties and basically how to profit from people's misfortune, right? And I thought, well, here we are. The vultures are really circling, right? If somebody is now looking at this as effectively a business model. And I think that this is a very concerning trend, that essentially now we've got so many people in difficulty and people effectively in mortgage stress and people being forced to sell, that now typically, you always see the vultures circling and trying to pick over the bones of distressed sales.
Well, look, I know who you're talking about. I know the person that runs that. She's been around for since the early 2000s. It's a number of my friends and colleagues have did the course when it was $3,000, and I believe now it's being offered at $900. The simple fact of the matter is that you just got to go, if you really want to find out what distressed properties, who's in distress, start looking at the courts and see who's the councils, what council. It usually comes by way of levies not paid or rates not being paid. And all sorts of things. But look, it's not new. This is being around for a while. But yes, it is another sign. It is another signpost of the times that we're in, and it is another signpost of the fact that there is a lot of mortgage stress out there. On the other side of that coin, you've got actual law firms and accountancy practices ramping up to accommodate or accommodate the business that they're going to be getting by from small businesses and large businesses, for that matter, that are becoming insolvent. Insolvency practices are ramping up. Lawyers are also preparing for that, and I subscribe to a firm that gives me daily notices. And yesterday, I was talking to one of our followers, and I was saying to him yesterday, I received close to 65 insolvency notices from companies, small and large companies, some companies that have been running for 5 years, others that have been running for 17 years. And I would dare say that 30 to 40% of them were related to the property or the construction sector, or involved in that field. And it was alarming and that was only in New South Wales and Victoria. That was only the daily. I'm talking about that was just the daily notice, and these are huge. These are huge numbers when you come to think that the SMEs are, SMEs could be employing anywhere between 5 to 25 people, and that is and this has just been increasing on a daily basis. I do believe that this month, we've, in terms of monthly notices, they've been creeping up. I also have been seeing signs of full-time employment, decreasing. As well as they can say all they want about the fact that but there was so many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of jobs being created in the last over the last 12 months here. But now we're starting to see the reality of it, and so these are signposts that of what's to come. So look, I've seen those. It's not new. It's not new. And look, in some cases, in a grand scale, I've also worked with major insolvency companies in the city myself, where we've taken over entire projects to offsell to astute investors that would buy in the newly constructed apartments, in 2007, 2008, that. And that we were obtaining 35% drops from in value to give to the investors at the time. So but they're very, very strong signposts of what's around the corner.
Yeah, and we certainly know the employment numbers were pretty bad that came out this week. The growth in part-time jobs, yes, but the growth in full-time jobs definitely slowing. And my forward-looking SME surveys absolutely are highlighting that a number of SMEs are really struggling with cash flow. They've got tax bills due. They're struggling with those, all those issues. So, I think we're all seeing the same thing. Final question then, Edwin, today. Your thoughts on prices next 6 months? Up, down, sideways? Where do you think they're going to go?
Well, I was very, very bearish, at the beginning of the year, and I did say, obviously, I wish they'd sent the two Labor Party members before the election, sent them away for 6 weeks before the election, and I think Labor would have won. But hey, I'm not politically inclined either way. But it was just one of those things. I think what's interesting is that one thing for sure, Martin, one thing I can be sure of, and is the fact that my industry is going through a world of pain. And if listing numbers don't increase, and I mean in the short term, in the next 4 to 6 weeks, if they don't increase significantly, there is going to be a world of pain coming from what. That would be the sideways event, because a lot of agents themselves are going to be putting their principal places of residence or investment properties, if they haven't already, on the market. In terms of, there's another phenomenon that has been occurring, and that is the HK phenomenon. People from Hong Kong, Sporty has been reporting He's interviewed a few of the purchasers of the auctions that he's been attending around the Lane Cove hills and in Carlingford area for people that have been paying exorbitant prices, where he's had personal conversations with the buyers. That they've told him that they've flown in just a week in beforehand just to buy, and this is the thing that you and I discussed a day or two ago on the phone, Martin, and that is, like, a lot of people say, how can it be? How can they buy? How can foreign investors buy established properties when they're meant to really only be buying new, or properties that would require significant renovations, and without getting into all the technicalities, let's say new, and it's quite simple. If the if the powers to be are not implementing the governing measures to control this, it has been happening from the early 2000s, and that is that they set up trusts, or they set up companies and set up trusts under the companies in order to buy the property. So you can't buy you as an individual can't buy an established property, but a company can, and you can be the director of that company. You can be the beneficiary of the trust. So they're the loopholes that need to be closed off, and also then you've still got how they get the money in is another thing. How they get the money out of Hong Kong is also obviously contacts and connections that they have there, and also in China. So all these things need to seriously be looked at by our government, by our state legislators, and our federal legislators as well, because there's low volumes, and all we need is 2,000 purchases from coming into Sydney, and what's that going to do? Obviously, it's going to be in certain pockets of Sydney that would move to. It doesn't necessarily translate to all of Sydney. Doesn't necessarily translate to beyond Sydney. There are certain pockets, and we have seen that where Sporty, particularly when he was at an auction last week, he saw one where the two builders were going toe to toe on a derelict home just behind Carlingford, and on I think he said he was on a 900 square metre block of land, and two builders, local builders, were going to toe to toe, and they got up to 950. And next thing you know, this person that had just flown in from Hong Kong, puts their pallet up, and they buy it for $1,150,000. Blew everybody away. So but there's got to be greater controls into that.
Yeah, so I think what you're saying, if I can sort of read between the lines, is that probably ahead there will be some positive movements in some areas, specifically because of those local factors. Maybe more houses than units, by the way, I think, but out in the urban fringe and beyond, very different story, and probably very little price movement up over the next little while, because the demand-supply story is just so different, isn't it?
Yeah, and look, again, Martin, it also comes back to, like I said, if the real estate sector, if the real estate industry is in the world of caca, well, what about the ancillary services that around it, and also there's the construction sector as well. So it's only a matter of time. It's almost like we're playing a game and see who can hold the breath the longest.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it goes back to the what we said, right? Conspiracy versus reality. The reality that we've been discussing here today is actually very concerning, and certainly very little light at the end of the tunnel so far.
Yeah. Look, we could go on and on, but it's the same. It's the same thing. There's a lot of pain out there, and things aren't getting easier. There are pockets that are glowing, but there are also others that are on literally on fire, and a lot of people are getting burnt and getting scorched.
Yeah, Edwin, thanks once again for your time. Very interesting to catch up and get the latest from you. And we'll do it. We'll do it again soon. I see you got your hat on just in case, right?
Yeah, just in case I get another tweet from Uppercut telling me that he's seeing another spaceship down at land at Wollongong somewhere, and he's out to
They're out there somewhere, Edwin.
I think they're in his backyard.
See you later. Thanks very much.
All the best, man.
Cheers. So there you have it, straight from the property market front line. And I think Edwin makes some very important points. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.